It started with a child whispering 3 days like a secret she was ashamed to own, and with me, 7 months pregnant, soaked to the bone at the iron gate of a mansion I had no business standing in front of, and with a father who walked in from a rainstorm and finally looked his life in the eye. My name is Grace. I used to be a head nurse in pediatric hematology until the day I caught my husband cheating with a patient, and somehow the disciplinary mark landed on me, so yeah, I know what it feels like to be the easy scapegoat. You know what I mean? And that night the security guard hauled me into the Mercer house to dry off, while the private doctor checked my pulse and the baby's heartbeat, and declared I was simply exhausted. Then he left his paperwork on the table, and one line jumped out at the man in the dark coat, reading it previously, worked at Westview Children's, the same hospital where his little girl Emma, 7 years old, with a smile like a watercolor sun, was fighting leukemia. He introduced himself as Daniel. He didn't waste words. He said the private nurse had just quit. He said he would pay me a full salary if I followed protocol and took care of his daughter. And there was a soft crack in his voice that told me this was not a businessman talking, but a dad who was scared he'd already missed too much. The house looked perfect and unlived in the kind of quiet that makes you feel loud just by breathing. And in that quiet, I met the third person in our story, Veronica, the stepmother, in a fitted dress, espresso in hand, rules at the ready. I'm in charge, you follow. No questions, no changes. And I nodded, because I've learned the fastest way to the truth is sometimes to go straight through the gatekeeper, not around her. Emma's room was end of the hall, right? A little desk with coloring pages, a doll, and a girl who studied me like I might be another grown-up who would leave RU. Like the last nurse, she asked. Not if I can help it, I said. And when she rolled up her sleeve, I saw the faint purple bruises that didn't line up with injection sites. And I felt that old cold bell ring inside me, the one that says, look closer, write everything, do not assume. So I started my log the way I used to at the hospital, time of dose, blood pressure, color of the pill reaction, and Veronica breezed in and locked the medicine cabinet and said, I only want 2 lines at nighttime, and reaction leave the rest to me. And I smiled and wrote anyway, because details are oxygen when a child's life is on the line, because the pills were sometimes orange, sometimes white. Same name, different label stock. 2 bottles had corrected expiration dates painted over with liquid paper, and because Emma's fatigue was worse on the days Veronica called a skip. I called an old colleague, Dr. Lucas read the protocol number, the dosage the manufacturer codes, and he said, what I already knew in my bones, changes require the treating physician's signature, and the legal guardian's sign off with a hospital stamp. Anything else is a violation. Do you have copies? He asked. I will, I said, and I started gathering what a courtroom calls evidence and what a child calls proof that the adults have not lost their minds. I took photos. I hid a voice recorder in a cotton swab box, because I'd heard the way Veronica's voice dropped when Emma hesitated at a dose if you don't take it. I'll tell Dad to fire Miss Grace and... Yeah, that happened. And I tracked down Martha, a housemaid, who admitted she'd been fired after telling Veronica not to withhold a prescribed increase. She handed me crumpled receipts for cheaper substitute meds, and I tucked them into my folder. 2 days in the pattern was so clear it made me queasy, worse bruising, when the brand swapped shallow breathing, when the skip days stacked up. And then came the night that tears through the middle of this story like a rip in fabric. Daniel came home early, no warning. Opened the front door to the sound of his daughter sobbing. Found her kneeling on the floor with a chipped wooden ruler nearby, and Veronica saying something about rules and spilled water, and Emma, with her whole chest shaking, looked up at her father and whispered, Dad, I only have 3 days to live. If you're a parent, you know the way a sentence can reach inside your ribcage and pull a wire. Daniel went paper white. Who told you that? and the room felt like it stopped breathing, while Veronica said I was the one scaring her to gain sympathy. And I stepped down the stairs with my folder and my phone, and a calm my old charge nurse used to call winter weather, steady and unbothered, and I pressed play. Cut the medicine. It saves effort and money. The child won't last much longer anyway. Veronica's voice had the indifference of someone discussing a grocery list, and I laid out the forged protocol change without the doctor's signature, or Daniel's, the photos of relabeled bottles, the bank transfers out of Emma's medical fund, into accounts tied to Veronica's name, emails to a lawyer about moving assets after Emma passed, and you could hear the snap in Daniel's chest when he realized the storm inside his walls had a name. He called the police. He carried Emma to the car, and under blue and red lights, an officer read out withdrawals like a ledger of betrayal, while Veronica tried on tears, rage, excuses, all of it falling to the floor like broken glass. And for a minute I thought, this is the end of the worst part. The villain has a pair of handcuffs. The child has a way back. And then at the hospital, Dr. Lucas took one look at the labs and sat down hard. You need to be ready, end stage. The kindest thing now is comfort and no fear. And that sentence cut a second wire in me because justice had arrived late to the scene. And that is a kind of cruelty all its own. We brought Emma home because the beeping of hospital machines is not how a 7-year-old should measure a day. We set up monitors and oxygen and a chair by the window that gets the kindest morning light. We baked cookies so the medication hour had a taste of vanilla. We took her to the park for 15 minutes to smell wet grass and hear a guitar down the path. And on a cold dawn, she asked to see the sun wake up. So we rolled her stretcher to the roof and tucked blankets around her and held her hands while the sky went from bruised blue to gold. And I am telling you, some light does not come from the sun at all. It comes from a father deciding he will never be too busy again. It comes from a little girl who saw more clearly than any adult in that house. It comes from the small mercy of being believed. Meanwhile, the investigation widened. The police pulled emails where Veronica and a lawyer mapped out what to do with everything that would be left after a child's funeral. The DA called to discuss charges, fraud, and intentional harm. An indictment on the way, the medical fund freezing, and then returning. And Daniel asked me late one night at the kitchen table, plea deal and fast restitution for other kids who need medicine, or push for the max, and let the court mark the line in stone. And I said, the money will help, but money never replaces the time we let slip, or the breaths a child had to steal just to keep pace. Truth needs its day under bright lights, not a hallway negotiation. And he nodded and said, then we go to trial. People like to ask if I hated Veronica. I didn't. Hatred would have cost Emma oxygen, and I refused to pay that price. I saved my strength for sharper things, for writing down every dose and every reaction. Because the simplest data set can save a life, for telling Emma, no one gets to hit you, not your mother, not anyone. For the moment, Daniel finally said with his full voice, you don't have any say here anymore, and meant it. If you are waiting for the fireworks, there weren't any. There was a kitchen that smelled like butter and sugar, and a little girl who laughed at her dad for getting powdered sugar across his shirt, and a father who learned how to read a pulse without glancing at the monitor, and a nurse with a belly and a folder, and a stubborn streak that would not be moved, and a house that started to feel for the first time like a place where people were safe to breathe. I know some of you will ask how it ended. Veronica was indicted. The search warrants turned up the rest of what you already suspect, and Emma's case became part of the charge sheet. And Daniel set up a fund in his daughter's name for families who cannot afford the exact drugs she needed. And if you want a neat bow, I can't give you one, because grief is not a straight line and accountability is never fast enough for the people who waited too long. So here is where I leave you, with a question that keeps the comments wild and honest. What would justice look like to you? A lighter sentence with full restitution and mandatory service to educate parents on why you never, ever skip a protocol or the maximum penalty the law allows to mark the line and keep others from crossing it. How much blame do you put on a father who didn't see what was happening in his own house? And what does redemption look like for someone like that? Have you ever watched a caregiver hide behind a title while doing harm, or a small voice tell the truth no one wanted to hear? Drop your thoughts below. Challenge me. Tell me where you're watching from and what you would have done at that kitchen table. And if you believe a good record and a stubborn notebook can still move the needle. Hit subscribe, share this with someone who needs to hear a hard story told softly, and type light if you think Emma deserved the brightest morning.